I'm Lindsay, and I'm here at the 5 Points District at what some people call the city beneath the streets. That's right, underground Atlanta. Atlanta began as a railway city. It started to get really dangerous when the automobile was introduced, so they started to build bridges. And then they decided to connect those bridges with viaducts, which we're on right now. This is Upper Alabama Street, a viaduct. Whoa! The bottom was used as a storage area and pretty much forgotten about until in 1969 it was rediscovered by two investors who turned it into an entertainment complex, which was underground Atlanta. But then, once again, it was rediscovered and turned into a shopping mall. So we're gonna see what's going on today. Woo! We've made it. We're in underground Atlanta, and I'm ready to talk to some people and see if we can get some information. Let's do it. Let's go. Do you know anything about what's going on?
Just that it's in decline. Haven't been here in a long time.
Right. Do you know why it's here or like what's going on?
No, I just know this is a new location for the masquerade.
Well, there you have it. Nobody really knows what's going on.
The holidays now feel rather hollow at Ahmad's Persian cuisine. It's because of this collapsed concrete. Owner Ahmad Nazar, seen here last month, tells us he heard a loud noise Sunday afternoon, then saw this.
I was in the kitchen getting ready for dinner. Then I heard a big noise, so I came outside. I noticed that the beam under the sidewalk is rusted and it's been broken.
A McLovin employee shows us the basement. No issues there. A city engineer says downtown sidewalks break into basements about once a year.
So the moisture goes down and it pulls the chemicals through, and those chemicals react with the concrete, and sooner or later it just gets thinner and thinner and it falls apart underneath.
Michael Kleffner stresses there's no need to be alarmed, but says property owners could be proactive.
The risk isn't very high. I mean, in most of those times you're going to see it and it's going to crack, and then you'll see the light through the bottom.
As for whose pocket will fill this pit, the sidewalk belongs to the city. But Kleffner says everything from the back of the curb to the property line is the property owner's responsibility to maintain and fix.
I just want to be open as soon as possible.
Over the next few days, we'll show you documentation and research and let you be the judge.
We'll also dive into many hidden corners of downtown Chattanooga to show you exactly what's underneath your feet.
Hinting at what is often called underground Chattanooga, you can readily spot these architectural oddities downtown.
What appears to be archways of windows buried deep below a sidewalk.
These are just one of many examples of why Chattanooga residents like Dr. Nicholas Hornerkamp believe these streets were raised.
And I think Chattanooga changed vertically and came up higher.
But why? And when? Through our research, we learned the flood of 1867 was the largest in the city's recorded history.
The devastating effects of the heavy rain caused structural damage to downtown Chattanooga, destroying the military bridge. Many residents in the surrounding area died in the flood. Though not as severe as 1867, Chattanooga experienced heavy flooding throughout its early history.
So were flood victims tired of the destruction? Did they decide to raise what many consider to be downtown Chattanooga an entire floor using dirt or foundry silt? The historical data is spotty.
You know, when you look at old images of the Central Block, there's no image, illustrated or photograph, that shows the Central Block losing a story.
No documentation specifically about this happening, and that's driven people crazy.
Local historians have spent years exploring downtown Chattanooga buildings, looking for tangible evidence to prove the fact underground Chattanooga does exist.
The underground in itself, just the concept, is part of Chattanooga history. And it's something that even if it's proven not to be, or if it's proven to be, or somewhere in the middle, that it is an important story to tell.
David Moon spends countless hours going through old photographs like this and is skeptical Chattanooga streets were raised one full floor.
While others believe underground Chattanooga begins on 6th and 7th Streets and goes all the way to what was one time a railroad on Broad Street.
Seems almost impossible to have raised, but cities do that all the time. Look at New York City.
Many cities around the United States did raise their buildings in the 1800s, using different methods. Hornerkamp, like other historians, believe Chattanooga residents used dirt near the downtown courthouse on Georgia Avenue to raise the streets.
While the project would have been a major undertaking, could it be possible? Visually, it's compelling.
Dirt can go down a lot easier than it can go up.
Some would argue those window arches are just coal chutes. But would a business owner really need that many coal chutes to heat his building?
Seems like an excessive amount of coal chutes here and in other areas right around here. Why put in a window that you're never going to use? It just doesn't make any sense.
But that is not the only piece missing in this massive puzzle. Questions of underground arches and windows.
Tunnels and stone walls leave us digging deeper into underground Chattanooga. Now it's time to show you the visual proof.
For years, historians have tried to prove the fact that Chattanooga streets were raised one full floor. Here's what we found in our research.
Some, if not most, of the buildings on these heavily traveled streets are more than 130 years old. But what's behind these walls may tell a different kind of story.
Did these buildings always have basements, or was this old stone and brick at one time a grand entrance with front doors and windows throughout? Jamal Williams and I suit up and dig deeper to find out.
Welcome to some of the oldest, most mysterious, and historic basements in downtown Chattanooga.
We will show you what exactly is under East 7th, Market, Broad, and Cherry Streets. And while it wasn't always pretty or easy,
it's an adventure we won't soon forget.
So we're in downtown Chattanooga, right underneath Broad Street, and this wall right here, some even believe this might have been the entrance into underground Chattanooga.
we begin with Broad Street in a place very well known in the scenic city, the historic Tivoli Theater.
Just a few steps down in an adjacent basement, we learn more about a bizarre basement. Down these stairs is a room that's used as a tornado shelter. Many of the older buildings here in Chattanooga have archways like this one in their basement that people believe may have been windows prior to the city being raised.
Appears to be an old window front.
Jason McGlowan is a structural engineer and has been through many of these old buildings most consider underground Chattanooga. He also works in new construction and claims every time he starts a new job in downtown Chattanooga, crews spend hours digging out foundry silt.
There would be no reason to put a window underground with the street level being up here unless at one time the street level was down here lower.
Throughout our research, we stumbled upon many of these arches. Jason believes they were at one time windows.
So you think this could have been the first floor, possibly?
I believe at one time several of these buildings that are built like this was the original first floor.
Several buildings with basements in downtown Chattanooga all reportedly look similar.
From Broad, we head east to 7th Street, where many of these same arches sit below Candace Coffee.
You would find this with fine, exterior style brick with windows and doors in it, and then on the other side, a stone wall.
Local historian Maury Nicely has also been in the basement of Cadence Coffee House.
Until I went into the Cadence Coffee basement, I'd become very sort of suspicious, because when you start looking at the documentary evidence, I've come up with nothing but dead ends.
Our investigation continues down Market Street to the Miller Brothers building.
Constructed in 1898, the building served as a department store until 1985, now home to office space.
But through a small door in the basement, more arches exist, with another stone wall. Could they be coal chutes from the past, or windows?
Just a few blocks down the road on Market Street is the Sports Barn and Big River Grill. Both have basements they consider underground Chattanooga.
But historians believe what actually lies underneath the Sports Barn and Big River are the old car barns that were at one time used to house horses with underground stables, deliberately constructed underground.
Through double basement doors, though, you can see rusted poles, an electrical box, and a gate. Stepping into this part of hidden Chattanooga also shows a metal sheet right underneath 3rd Street with hanging chains.
We've been told at one time someone could get all the way to Ross's Landing underneath these busy streets. But why? That's still a mystery.
Back up Market Street, our journey takes us to Cherry Street. This building was home to Cooper's office space for decades. Under these old wooden floors, you can see a glimpse into Chattanooga's past. This basement is full of sealed-off archways.
We have seen the visual evidence of underground Chattanooga. We have even been told a few stories.
A utility crew was digging a big trench right down on Market Street someplace back about 20 years ago, or 30 years ago. And they came across a tree that had been cut off, so the trunk was still there and the roots were into the ground 10 feet down.
These eerie stories also lead us to believe underground Chattanooga does exist.
But how could a community using dirt or foundry silt raise an entire city one full floor?
Think there would be newspaper records. I mean, if we did this massive buildup of the city streets, you'd see newspaper records. You'd probably see, city council records of, a plan to do this.
Over the last 50 years, historians have dug through the records,
trying to kick up some dust and solve the underground Chattanooga mystery once and for all.
You've seen the visual proof, but what about the historical research?
We went and searched to find something to prove that Chattanooga Underground exists once and for all.
This line of mortar that comes down through here, it comes through in a distinct line, which makes me think that at one time there was a window of some sort here.
We have gone through historic images, Sanborn maps, and spent countless hours in the Chattanooga Public Library.
All with one purpose: validating underground Chattanooga.
The Sanborn maps never change. There's nothing that says, hey, here's our big project. There's never that smoking gun that you're like, boom. That tells you, some diary of someone who recounts how they did it, and we're like, well, there we go.
But is there? In the 1800s, there were a number of newspapers available for Chattanooga residents, including the Daily American Union.
Right after the 1867 flood in Chattanooga, an article was written in the Union claiming officials, including then Mayor Carr and the city engineer, suggested every street in Chattanooga be raised to sufficient feet above flood level, hoping to stop the city from ever having devastating destruction again.
Through article after article, we read more and more about these conversations, but no one big event where at one time all Chattanooga streets were raised.
The idea that Chattanooga downtown suddenly, the streets rose up by level just really probably is not accurate at all. It was probably more spotty than that, and the reasons for it, we always say it's because of flooding. It may have been because of flooding. It may have been because, some of it anyway, because of just uneven streets.
It's pretty well established, or at least in my opinion, if you look at the photographs of downtown, that at the very least Market Street pretty much stayed the same grade from really the Civil War up until now.
But did it? We went through city council records in search of proof.
This is documentation from April 20th, 1875, discussing an ordinance raising and establishing a grade of Market and other streets.
On March 10th, 1875, an article is written in the Daily Times concerning a citizen meeting.
Then, a few days later, on March 14th, Chattanooga Mayor James recommends Market Street be graded to the height of other downtown streets. We learned the ordinance raising the grade of Market Street above the high water mark passed on the second reading.
Could that be the documentation proving we really have an underground Chattanooga? You be the judge.
Local historian and Pickanooga developer David Moon believes grading was done in the city, but not enough to raise the city one full floor.
There was some grading to do there, especially. Broad once also had railroad tracks that went from the river to Union Depot. So it was a muddy mess. And really not as well traveled, at least by the public, at least by visitors coming into Union Depot.
This is a map of the city of Chattanooga in 1886 from the Library of Congress. Notice the train tracks and the depot on Broad Street, and the building with a 12 is the historic Reed House.
On April 10, 1886, the Daily Times published an article claiming that something needs to be done to level out the grading of Chattanooga streets, claiming the streets were in the most unattractive shape, confusing builders because they cannot tell which level to build their first floor.
By digging up all these old maps and documents, we found that downtown Chattanooga has history and a past under these heavily traveled streets. Good or bad, every brick and piece of rubble has a story.
But were these basements at one time the first floor? We may never exactly know.
We have to firmly establish that it happened, okay? And the problem for both the pro and the con side is there's not much documentation about anything that happened after 1880.
We have been told the Hamilton County Courthouse caught fire in 1910, destroying many documents that might have pointed us in the right direction.
And as time marches on, more progress is being made in our historic city. Progress that can also destroy images from the past.
In conclusion, we do think that the streets were raised, but just how much?
We did all the research and now we're putting it in your hands.
Welcome to Harvey Dent's Fact Finder. And tonight, I'm going to take you on a tour of the hollow streets of Sacramento. Thanks to the City of Sacramento's Building Planning Department's prompt response to my email requesting information about these underground structures, we have the information that they got in their survey back in 2009. Yeah, see, back in 2009, they paid to have a survey done of these underground structures. They call them the hollow sidewalks. Look, the area they surveyed covered a 14-block length by a 3-block width. Yeah, they paid for a survey to be done back in 2009. Well, you know what surveys are done for, right? It's to tell you what's there because you have no idea what's there. So this block, this area, was their survey area. These are the addresses, the parcel numbers of buildings or structures that have substructures beneath them. All of these addresses have substructures beneath them, and all of those addresses are in that rectangle. So I'm going to go over a few of the more interesting pictures here, but the link is down in the description if you would like to view this survey for yourself. Now notice they give years of when the streets were raised. Yes, years of when the streets were raised, but they don't give years of construction of these buildings. I mean, if the gold rush brought all the settlements and all the people to this area, then who built these brick structure that the area was raised above? The hollow streets, the hollow sidewalks, you can see where the pillars separate the sidewalk from the streets. Right here. Oh, this building just happened to be owned by the state of California, of course. So all the buildings that had access to these sites were owned by state of California or friends of state of California, people that could keep the secret. Now the buildings are all run down, worn down, about to be torn down, and this history beneath them is crumbling and going to be torn down as well. Look at the amount of brick it would have taken to cover that area in structures like this. The area it's an underground city. They're all connected. You can't tell me that individual owners raised their building up, in some cases 14 feet, and made a point to ensure that their neighbor still had access to their bottom front door. The claim that these brick structures were built as support for what would be the new elevation city is ridiculous. Look at the amount of brick it would have taken. How could they have gotten that many supplies to that area? Trains were not even going to that area until the late 1890s. We're talking about 1860. Oh, great. Look who just happens to be the owner of this building, the Church of Scientology. Well, as much as these parasites love to make money, love to turn things into attractions, why would they not have taken advantage of having control of all of the buildings that had these structures within them and underneath them? Why would they not open that up as Old Town Sacramento tours? Why would they not profit off of that? Why did they not do anything to try and preserve this site? They basically left the site wide open to just be demolished. Most of the buildings in that area have, they all have these substructures, and they've all been just worn down and vacant, and had homeless people in them, end up catching fire and destroyed, and they all have these substructures, and it was just allowed to happen. Yeah, they had a survey done of it, but why would you have a survey done if you've known it was there the whole time? There's this official building records, right? There's construction, city construction. They didn't know they had to have a survey. So this whole system, this whole underground system, network of brick buildings, which were, who knows what it was before, they never even attempted to salvage. They wanted every opportunity they had to let it just be taken over by, nature or homeless. They did. And now I'm sure that none of these brick structures look anything like they do in these pictures. I'm sure that they are all crumbled messes, just like what I stumbled upon. Look at that. You're talking 9-10 feet of headroom. Who builds a substructure that high and then put something on top of it, and expects every neighbor in his neighborhood to do the same thing? Well, that's what they say happened. I kind of hate to have to be the one to point it out, because it doesn't really take a genius to see that there's more building to this structure than meets the eye. Otherwise, the brick would not look like it was cut through the floor. So how much more building is there? Is that not a poured concrete floor? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's a poured concrete floor, which would lead me to believe that there's more underneath, because look at that pillar. Why does that pillar look like it is, has partial bricks in the ground? What I'm going to do is I'm going to go right outside that perimeter area that they say they surveyed and see if there's any signs of these structures beyond that area they surveyed. If there is, then there's no doubt in my mind that the people that claim to have built this city are not the people that built this underground city. Look at how old yet well preserved some of the brick is. Look how old and worn down some of the brick is. But look, this was built as a street retaining wall with a poured concrete floor. See, because this is construction in the mid-1800s. This is, what they did. This is why stuff was built to last. See, because they would mine all day, and then at night they would have to come and bake bricks. Because, if they weren't mining, then they were baking bricks, because someone had to bake all the bricks for this shit. So in 1860 or before, they had all the time to build all these brick structures, had all the means to get all the supplies there to build all these brick structures, and then had all the supplies and all the means to get the supplies there to build the streets 14 feet high. This is all about the same time around the gold rush and the time that the Capitol building is being built, right after a flood, so no one would have their own property to tend to. So it was John Sutter Jr. and all the enslaved Indians and the miners that did all this brickwork and then raised the street levels up. I mean, these are not feats that can be done in this day and age in a decade. Yet these people did it in the 1860s, in year after year, just completion after completion, leaving whole levels like this underground. There's definitely more building to that there. Would you not agree that there's more building to that there? Funny, they still had to access the waterways that the previous inhabitants had developed, because they were too stupid to develop their own. Yeah. Look at this. I mean, this is buried, man. This is buried history. Buried, and they hoped it was forgotten history. This is what that site looked like before I saw it. This is what the site looked like when they first tore down that building. And this is what they let it turn into. They want it and the buildings around it to crumble, because it will erase any remaining proof there may be that there were people here before the 1800s. A civilization probably much more advanced than we are in many ways, a lot more in tune with who they were supposed to be. Unlike us, something made them leave their history buried. they're now hollow sidewalks. So 1864-65, they claim construction began on raising the street levels. Well, this picture from the Capitol construction is from 65, and I don't see any work being done on street levels. Do you? Do you see anything that looks like it's underground being worked on? What about over here on this side? Do you see anything that looks subterranean, underground? Looks like they're making hollow sidewalks anywhere? I don't see any hollow sidewalks. But I do see a hollow staircase. Oh, and some boo-boo stains. Yeah, I see some boo-boo stains, but is that a hollow staircase is leading to the actual, what was the first level? Is that water damage or flood damage? How does a building that is newly constructed look so old?
Today, Los Angeles is famous for its sprawl, a city without a center. But in the 1920s and 30s, downtown was the heart of it all. And the banks and bars stayed open all night long. When Prohibition hit, the party kept going. They just moved it underground into a secret network of speakeasies. There were no worries about getting busted because crooked cops and big-time politicians were running the show. Back in the 1920s, the place to be in Los Angeles was around 5th and Main. Palatial hotels, swanky saloons, and million-dollar theaters were all crowded into a 10-block radius. Downtown LA is the original Los Angeles with all these vintage hotels and theaters. I'm meeting with Richard Shave. He's an expert on everything downtown, everything underground. Richard, how you doing?
Good to see you, Don.
You too.
Welcome to old downtown Los Angeles.
Right. This is the glory days right down here.
Main Street was where everything happened.
If you peeled up this modern intersection, you'd find the remnants of a vast subterranean hive dating back to 1910, when horse-drawn wagons crowded the dusty streets. To avoid the chaos above ground, 70 miles of service tunnels were built, connecting the basements of all the major hotels. But just 10 years later, they became the perfect setup for illegal drinking dens. The basement of this modern-day bar, the King Edward Saloon, was the center of LA's seedy underworld. This saloon in Prohibition, what was it?
Well, it wasn't a saloon because it was illegal to run a bar. It became a piano store.
Oh, really?
So
which was a front?
The speakeasy was downstairs, so you'd go in to look at a piano and go through the back and down the stairs this way.
Okay. Once a speakeasy, always a speakeasy, huh? A lot of these places, these speakeasies, would use their delivery chutes as the entrances to the place. So that's how people got down sometimes. And this is the entrance here, the cloakroom. You would have talked to this guy here, and then back here you would have maybe used the special knock, who knows. And in you go. 90 years ago, this shabby basement was crowded with LA's elite thrill seekers, breaking the law. This is a bar, like other bars, but they're all underground.
They're all underground. They're pretty makeshift. They painted these murals to give a little decor. You would come in, and there'd be, of course, a police officer down here to make sure you didn't bring your own liquor.
What do you mean, the police officer?
The police in Los Angeles ran the racket for bootleggers.
In most East Coast cities, the mob cashed in on Prohibition and made a killing serving booze. But in Los Angeles, the chief of police functioned more as the chief of the rackets. Most cops were in on the action, and the corruption went all the way to City Hall.
Several mayors throughout Prohibition were absolutely knee-deep, to the point where Mayor Frank Shaw's brother was the one in charge of receiving all the monies for gambling, prostitution, bootlegging.
In 1929,
Revenue from bootleg liquor sales in Los Angeles County was $35 million. It was common practice for the mayor's office, the chief of police, and the cops to take a 15 to 20% graft. The bigwigs would kill to protect their piece of the action, and that brought them down. The chief of police was arrested after he tried to murder the man investigating his dirty department. The scandal toppled the mayor, who was recalled from office for his part in these criminal enterprises. After Prohibition ended in 1933, many of the tunnels were sealed and the scandal forgotten for decades.
I mean, you had the mayor, the city hall, chief of police, wealthiest guys in town running this racket. You know, up on the streets, solid citizens. Down here in the tunnels, a life of crime. LA is all about appearances.
This is Cherry Street before 1889, and this is Cherry Street later, 1889. So this is what Seattle looked like when it started. This is 1870s. The key to the photograph, the waterfront is just off the photo. So every single day during high tide, the tides would come in and turn those dirt streets into mud because they didn't know about tide floods. Now, when that first happened, the pioneers' response was, we can get over this, we can beat nature. So they decided to fill in the tide flats. Well, they're not the only town that did that. But most towns would use dirt for fill. Seattle used something else. Turned out to be the big mistake. They used sawdust. It's probably the worst landfill you could possibly use on the tide flat. When sawdust gets wet, it decomposes. It turns mushy. So early Seattle, the shopping district was built on decomposing sawdust on top of tide flats, and every single day the tides that come in and turn streets into mud. So Seattle got off to a very rough start. Now this is Cherry Street before the Great Seattle Fire. This is Cherry Street 2 months after the fire. So everything changed on June 6, 1889. Downtown Seattle burned to the ground in less than 12 hours, but he gave the city a chance to start over, correct their early mistakes, and build everything one level up. Now, the reason no one died from the fire, the homes are located higher on the hills above the fire. But it was a fast-moving fire. It was a glue fire that started in a woodworking shop. Glue at that time had to be melted, came in a brick, had to be melted in a glue pot. This was an overflowing glue pot in a woodworking shop that ignited the floor below. And the floor below was wood shavings and rags soaked with turpentine. Not to mention, every furniture in town was combustible. Ammunition, gunpowder, TNT, whiskey, and paint. That fire got off to a great start. Got off to such a fast start, they couldn't stop it, so they let the fire burn all the wood structures below because it didn't touch the homes. No one died. Great chance to start over. So this is Cherry Street before the fire. This is 2 months after the Great Seattle Fire, second half of 1889. Look how fast Seattle's getting back to business. Most towns after a fire will be traumatized for weeks, if not months. I don't know how long you've been in Seattle so far, but if you haven't picked up on the vibe of this town yet, this town's all about making money rapidly. Thank you, Amazon. So the day after the fire, merchants had already set up tents so they could sell again. In some spots, the ground was still hot from the fire, so they had to flood surfaces to stand in the water so they wouldn't burn their feet. Before the fire, downtown was wood, so the law of the ordinance after the fire, brick and stone. And we can watch one of the buildings go up after the fire. We just walked through it. We believe this building that we just walked through was the first completed after the fire. It's called the Schwerman Building. 5 months after the fire was complete, and we can watch it go up in this photograph. This is the very same brick column. 5 months in this time, this building is already complete. Now it's not that scary. Now this is when it became an issue. And you can tell this story in every town, big and small, around the planet. Civic projects always look great on paper until someone's got to pay for the project and follow through with it. That's what happened here. City had a great plan on paper, 10 years, 2 phases. First phase, push out the tides of seawalls to make this dry. Second phase, when this is dry, elevate the new streets and sidewalks above this. Show the plans to the merchants. Merchants said it looks great on paper, except for the timeline. We lost money because of the fire. We need to make money again, and we need to do it quickly. But don't get us wrong, we're all for this project. Go ahead and follow through. But in the meantime, we own this property. So that means our buildings go up first. Our buildings go up fast, and our buildings go up at this level, even though you plan to raise everything above this. But we're going to make this work for both of us, so we have a compromise. Our compromise is, when you go up, we'll go up. When you finally elevate the new streets and sidewalks, we know we'll have to abandon the first floor of this building. So we'll be ready to go with the second entrance on the second floor. All the entryways to the brick and stone buildings above started out as the second floor of the buildings. This started out as the first floor. So I know when you walked in, you thought basement or cellar. Looks like that, but it's not. Basements and cellars get dug out. This is not dug out. This is simply the abandoned first floor of the building when the city went higher. This might help. Let's walk into a time machine. So 5 months after the Great Seattle Fire, second half of 1889, this building is complete, but none of this was here yet. They hadn't started the project. So if you walk into a time machine, we would have been outside the building. If you look that way, if you weren't looking at concrete, it would be west at the waterfront, so it was called Front Street. If you looked up, you were looking at open air, cloudy skies. So we would have been outside of the building on a wood sidewalk, and inside there was a shoemaker shop. And that's where we have Lost Souls. Okay, that went well. We would have been inside, looking out the window to the sidewalk and the waterfront and open air above. So the whole point to make is, they didn't dig this out. They willingly abandoned the first floor of the buildings because they had a second entrance ready to go. So this building started out without a basement. Now it looks like it has a basement. Call it artificial basement if you want. But they literally abandoned the first floor of the building, went up, and had that second entrance ready to go. And this would be a great time to tell the truth. We're not underground. We just use that word to lure people into our tour. The ground's below us. Between us and the tide flats we have decomposing sawdust. So that's why we call this tour Beneath the Streets, because we are beneath the streets. That's First Avenue. This is Cherry. So now that you're totally confused, I'll show you how they did this. Come on, slow the guys. All right, I'll do this part quickly, I promise. Timeline. Buildings go up first. All the brick and stone buildings in Pioneer Square complete within a year after the fire, give or take 1890. Then the city pushed out the tides with seawalls to make this dry. After this was considered dry land, the next part of the project elevated the streets above the tide flats. And the construction for the streets after the fire, very, very simple construction. It's more or less stacked boulders or stone walls. This stone wall is out of Cherry Street, and there's another stone wall like it on the other side. Now, the one thing I didn't emphasize enough when I started, the hills that are just east of here that you think are steep today were 3 times steeper. When the pioneers arrived, they were cliffs, 200-foot cliffs. So after the fire, this is pretty clear to everyone. We know our 2 problems. We build too low, cliffs are too high. We need fill to elevate this part of town. So the fill that elevates the neighborhoods below the cliffs came from the cliffs. Now you would think it would take a lot of labor and dynamite to knock down cliffs. It took very little labor and no dynamite because they copied a gold mining technique called hydraulic sluicing. They would fix steam-powered high-pressure hoses to the side of the cliffs and slowly erode the cliff sides. Then guide the dirt to this level through boxes that are called sluice boxes. They're about this wide, they're open air, and they channel or direct the dirt. Now there was an early issue with the project, and it's based on the rainy season. If you just let the fill sit during the rainy season, it would eventually flatten out, tamp down, or dissipate. They're just trying to keep that fill in place from the top, and this is where they got very clever. They fed the sluice boxes between the stone walls to elevate the new streets. And the stone walls for streets are called retaining walls because they keep the fill intact or in place. So the new street heights are anywhere from 8 to 35 feet high. They're about 8 to 10 feet at this level, but the underground goes east up the hills almost 5 blocks. Near the tops of the hills, walls can be as high as 35 feet. Project's almost done. Buildings are up, tides are out, cliffs are lower, streets are elevated above the tide flats. Almost done, but we're not. We're missing something. Well, first of all, it's based on the simplest form of human transportation. Sidewalk. Got it. See? Sidewalks. Sidewalks connect the streets. But the city didn't have money for new sidewalks. So that means the old sidewalks and the old storefronts are still down here, but the new streets are up there. But don't worry, Seattle always takes care of its people. They provide. So for shopping, the city provided ladders at the corners of the streets. So if you wanted to shop from the street above to the sidewalk below, you walk to the corner and you climb downstairs or ladder. Now, once you were down here, you were okay. You could still shop on the sidewalk in front of the shoemaker shop. But if you wanted to shop across the street, you're not going through that wall, it's back to the corner, up a ladder, across the street, back down, another ladder. So I hope you see the issue here. There's a gap. Building to my right, street to the left, no sidewalk above. Sidewalk now, but at that time they didn't have money for it. You were looking up at open air. So there was a gap and people died from this gap. For instance, if you were above the new street and you were texting and you got too close to the curb, you could fall anywhere from 8 to 35 feet to your death. Do you think they text back then? You're right, they didn't. Just trying to be funny, it didn't work. So, but you could fall anywhere from 8 to 35 feet to your death. Now, if you were down here, and you does smell weird down here. Trees could fall on top of you. A horse, what horses do? Other people, barrels from trucks. The last one should get pointer across. This part of town, Pioneer Square, there's a really serious one. So this part of town, Pioneer Square, is always on the pub, bar, or saloon part of town. So people would come up pubs, bars, and saloons about 3 or 4 in the morning, possibly impaired, and they would fall off the new streets, down the old sidewalks, into their deaths. By the way, here's a little known Seattle trivia fact. This is when AA started. AA started with a one-step program. Okay, that went as well as the shoes. The point I'm trying to make is people actually died. I think 40 people died in a short period. That's when the merchants went back to the city and said, fix this, but make it quick and cheap, and the city delivered. With a quick, clever, and cheap solution, right above us, they made the sidewalks above into bridges. They bridged the gap from the buildings to the streets. Here's where they built the sidewalks. They ran iron I-beams 1.5 feet into the side of the buildings and the streets. That's the connector or the anchor. The support system for the sidewalks, pretty obvious, arches. Now, I've done this for a while, and up until about 2 weeks ago, I identified these as Roman arches, until I took a private tour of 30 architects down here, and I was attacked. When I said Roman arches, I was attacked by 30 architects. We made this very clear. These are vaulted barrel arches, whatever they were. They're made to equally distribute weight and hold 4 times their weight. They covered the arches. Those became the brand new sidewalks, which are now bridges. They bridge the gap from the buildings to the streets. But why all the tunnels? We should be able to do this. These tunnels aren't supposed to be here by plan. The original plan on paper was to fill this in. Like every civic project in human history, they ran out of money. But they had already fixed the problem. Sidewalks as bridges. So the city decided, we'll get to it, we'll fill this in. And when it came time to fill in, they backed off. For good reason. Today, the tunnels are used by the city to lay pipes and utilities, but the original plan was to fill this in. So once again, we're not underground, ground is below us, sawdust on tie flats, we're beneath the streets, but what people in Seattle refer to as the underground would be 20 square blocks of hollow sidewalks or tunnels that run throughout Pioneer Square. Does that make sense, guys? So they didn't do it. That's the whole point to make. They did not take these tunnels out. They went up, abandoned the first floor, never got around to filling in the tunnels. And today we have what we call underground. Now, before I talk about the skylights, so this is how the tool works. The tunnels are owned by the city, but the building owners next to the tunnels do have rights. They're called easement rights. So as a building owner, if you extend the lower part of your building underneath the sidewalk next to it, the city considers that your property. But if you have a business below and you extend the business underneath the sidewalk next to it, the city considers it their property. They want the cuts. You have to get permission to pay a business fee or business tax. So the way we get to these tunnels, we do pay 3 different building owners to go through the property, to pay the club, for instance, a certain fee to walk through the club during the day when it's closed, to gain access to the tunnel next to it. We do the same thing on the first section. In that spot, we share the rent for that building with the ghost tour that runs at night, 2 different companies. So that's how we get to these tunnels. And what was I going to say? One of the coolest uses of the underground today, in my opinion, and you'll like this, this will be payback to your parents for taking on the history tour. But the coolest use of the underground today is a toy store that's been in this neighborhood now for about 40 years called Magic Mouse Toys. It's only a couple blocks away. They have 2 levels. So they got permission from the city to extend the lower level of the store right underneath the sidewalk that goes next to it. So if you go there at the end of the tour, go down below, then go to the section where they sell jigsaw puzzles. If you look up, you'll see one of these skylights. So there are some businesses that use the tunnels today. Now the skylights were put in when the project was complete. The last part of the project, the sidewalks above. It kind of kept things up. They abandoned the first floor of the buildings at that point, but they used the tunnels for shopping, kind of like a farmer's market. So they would just stack their goods throughout the tunnels. They had to build stairs to get down here, and then for lighting, they brought in skylights. So at one time, these skylights went all the way down the sidewalks in Pioneer Square. Today, unfortunately, most of the skylights are cemented over because they're not safe to walk on. These are considered unique skylights. They're unique because of the prisms. They were added to refract the lights coming through. Now, the informal shopping worked out until 1907, but in 1907, the city discovered bubonic plague down here. Bubonic plague is a rat-borne disease. Fleas and rats carry the plague. So the rats would come right off the ships, ports right below us. Rats would come off the ships, run through the tunnels, and spread the plague. The city panicked. They shut the tunnels down immediately, condemned the underground.
Thanks, Hooligan.
For instance, the original sidewalk right in front of this building was wood. Wood breeds bacteria, so building owners put concrete over the wood sidewalks to contain the plague. Then the city tried to eliminate the rat population with a bounty on rats or an offer to the people of Seattle. And the offer was, if you bring us a rat tail, we'll give you 10 cents for every rat tail you bring us. It may not be much today, but back then 10 cents was worth your effort. But they had to stop that program too early because kids in Seattle were too smart and they started to breed rats. Anything for a buck in Seattle. So the tunnel stayed condemned, but the plague went away fast. Only 7 people died. The city decided to condemn the tunnels for quite a while longer. They could hide things. Think about it. It was a great place to hide anything the city didn't want to admit to. Hiding in Elliott Bay at night, so they could offload their illegal liquor, whiskey in barrels, then hide the barrels of whiskey throughout the tunnels, also hiding illegal bars called speakeasies. So the tunnels were a great place to hide things. A certain generation of young satellites were the equivalent of a rave. So young teenagers could party down here, and the police were okay with that. Keep it off the streets, do whatever you want down below, worked out for both. But the turning point for the neighborhood, when this all changed, 1960s, developers wanted to tear all this down and then replace buildings like this with modern buildings. That's when the historians and the architects. So the turning point for the neighborhood, 60s, when the developers wanted to tear this down. So the historians and architects said, well, no, you're not going to tear this down. It's our history. You can't tear these buildings down. So they lobbied for a very important federal law. It's called the Historic Preservation Act. In Canada, it's called the Heritage Act. That act states, if you have a building with any sort of historic significance, you better have a valid safety reason to tear it down. If you don't, the building stays up, you have to maintain it, and to make any changes to the outside, they have to be approved by the Historic Preservation Board. They want to keep the building looking the way it looked in the 1800s. So before 1970, this is the worst neighborhood in town, but after 1970, the establishment of the Historic Preservation Act, this became one of the largest protected historic districts in the United States. That's when the city took the condemned status out of the tunnels, pushed everything back to the surface. Building owners took care of their property. And as I said, in some cases, you could extend your business underneath the sidewalk in the street. So when we first walked in the alley, you saw Merchant's Cafe. They have a party room that goes underneath the sidewalk next to it. The nightclub in some cases, and then Magic Mike stores.
Hey Dave, about how long ago did this become underground?
I think they capped it off.
People will do it in
Probably
our
1920s.
and then they'll make it nicer.
Actually, it's probably before that. So the early 1900s. So the last step was the sidewalks that kind of bridged the gap, and that's when we capped it off, and that's when they officially had it undone.
All right, so the official story is that there were what was that? Tides that came in that pretty much turned into mud there.
Yeah, the tides before the fire could come up to where we're standing and even further up. So the original city was built low on tide floods, and the tides came in and flooded this almost everything. So the started with 7 seawalls, now there's 1 on the waterfront, keeps the tides out, and then they elevated above the tide flats with fill, which is between the stone walls for streets.
Are there any more underground tunnels around here?
Yeah, the whole neighborhood. As far as access, through the 2 tours, or if you go to a business, or if you know a building on it. The city has complete access, but it's about 20 square block, and part of it actually goes into Chinatown.
Oh wow!
Those tunnels are cool. We'd love to see them because that's during the Klondike era, and this is the red light district, it extended into that neighborhood. And some of their tunnels, abandoned tunnels, still have remnants of opium dens and gambling dens.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of that was pushed right into that.
Yeah, that's
So
what
that's pretty cool.
some folks in the chat were saying, something about the opium dens and all that.
Possible you could access, there's a really cool museum up there on King Street called the Wing Loop Museum.
Okay.
They may have access to some of that, so you might want to check out for that museum.
Okay. Yeah.
That'd be the best way.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of part of a research community on YouTube, and one of the things we're looking into is kind of like underground cities. There was a situation where a lot of evidence is coming out that there were mud floods back in the past, like 200 or so years ago. These lots of evidence of buildings that are kind of submerged halfway underground and all that, but like way far away from the coast too.
Right.
So, we're looking into that stuff. I was just taking my people on a tour.
Well, mud flows could have come from volcanoes. The biggest fear of Rainier going off is not so much lava, it's actually the mud flows. They're called lahars.
Right.
And Mount St. Helens in the 80s, it came into the rivers. All that mud comes right off the side of the volcano and goes right into the rivers. So that might have been where the mud flows came from.
I mean, this stuff happened like all over Europe, China, like all across the U.S. There's a lot of different places where this is, I don't know, it's something like some sort of worldwide cataclysm that took place. And there's a lot of evidence coming up that a lot of history was kind of covered by people and mud. Yeah.
And mud's a good preserve. Preserve stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, like Vesuvius.
Right.
Yeah, I mean the bodies are preserved because they're kind of encased in mud.
Yeah.
So that,
have you heard about the Empire of Tartaria?
I haven't.
Have not. Well, that's a lot of there's a lot going on. There's an empire that spread across most of the earth. The name of it was Tartaria. It was like a massive kingdom, basically. I mean, it was spread out in different districts. They had access to free technology and all that. It was pretty complex. A lot of people were getting into, looking into research concerning Tartaria. But something to look into. It ties into the whole underground civilization aspect of things. All right, this is like we're like walking on, these are the lights, the skylights for underground. So there's tunnels underground right now.
You can see how they've been covered over the years.
Yeah. Okay. And so all that, so that back there, that's the skylights that we saw earlier. Just like the skylights here. It's from there.
We are in north central Montana, the town of Havre, the Highline country.
And this is a frontier town with quite a history. The whole town moved underground.
In December of 1904, a devastating fire wiped out almost the entire town.
Now, already underground here were some little holes in the wall underground that were used for illicit purposes, like an opium den, a bordello. Well, because it was wintertime and they had to build and the population didn't know what to do, they all moved underground and expanded.
The tour of the underground starts above ground, walking the downtown streets over what appears to be a mural of sorts, made up of little blocks of glass. After you make your way down a flight of stairs beneath the streets, do you realize that the murals are really skylights, illuminating the darkened alleys, rooms, and hallways of the underground city.
The Havre folks don't want videos taken of the underground city, but they were okay with stills, so these will have to do. But think of this as a century-old underground shopping mall built under the streets to provide shelter to the local businesses and shoppers as the overground city was being rebuilt from the fire during that long, cold winter.
Havre was a pretty rambunctious town back then, pretty much Wild West with hard-drinking cowboys, rowdy railroad workers, and plenty of bawdy pastimes. Throughout its history, this underground expanse has been home to a saloon, restored to its original appearance, a bordello, which is also pretty much as it originally was, a Chinese laundromat, a drugstore, at least 3 opium dens, and rooms used for smuggling alcohol during Prohibition.
More respectable businesses have also been down here, and the tour consists of original and embellished exhibits, all carefully chosen based on old photos and historical accounts. There's a dentist's office, a bakery, a meat store, even a funeral parlor.
Chicago was first started by Jean DuSable in the 1780s, who built a farm near the mouth of the Chicago River. The city started to grow from there, and by 1837 had already reached a population of over 4,000. However, the city had a major problem. It wasn't built much higher than Lake Michigan, which led to poor drainage from the city streets. A lack of proper drainage and a capable sewer system led to many problems in the city, including 6 consecutive epidemics of typhoid fever and dysentery that ended with an outbreak of cholera that alone killed 6% of the Chicago's population in 1854. The lack of drainage also led to muddy streets, and even quick mud. A popular joke at the time made fun of these conditions by stating, "A gentleman who, passing by a street, discovers a man buried up to his shoulders in mud. The gentleman asks the man, 'Can I help you?' 'No, thank you,' the man replies. 'I have a good horse under me.'" Because of the appalling conditions and public health concerns, the city was forced to take action. So, in 1856, engineer Ellis S. Chesbrough drafted plans for a sewage system in Chicago that would fix the sanitation issues. Chesbrough, because of his water distribution system in Boston, was appointed engineer of the newly created Board of Sewerage Commissioners. Chesbrough concluded that Chicago was too low to dig underground sewers that would properly drain water from the surface. Thus, he had to make a bold decision. Chesbrough's plan came in 2 parts: build the sewer system above the ground, and then raise the buildings of Chicago anywhere from 4 to 14 feet. Buildings all over Chicago would be raised up, and then have new foundations built underneath them. Using simple jacks, contractors from around America took up the challenge to raise Chicago. All types of buildings were raised. The first masonry building was raised in January 1858 on the northeast corner of Randolph and Dearborn, where the Goodman Theater lies today. Engineers became more and more confident in their abilities, and as 1860 came, a group of only 6 engineers decided to take on the challenge of lifting over half a city block at once. The block was over 320 feet long and up to 5 stories tall. Located near Lake Street, it took up almost an entire acre and, including its sidewalks, weighed over 35,000 tons. These buildings were raised over 4 feet 8 inches and took 600 men using over 6,000 jack screws. These shops didn't close during this process, and it was very common for people to come and go even as the floor beneath them was being raised. In fact, the Tremont House Hotel was even raised while still retaining guests. This 6-story high, acre-large luxury hotel was raised 6 feet by over 500 men operating 10 jack screws each. Several people of interest, including a U.S. Senator, stayed obliviously in the hotel. One guest noted that the front steps seemed to be getting steeper every day. One of the most impressive feats conducted during the raising of Chicago was the raising of the Robbins Building, a 5-story building made of iron, 150 feet long and 80 feet wide, that, including furniture, clothing, etc., weighed an estimated 27,000 tons. What made the raising of this building impressive was that it was such a large load over a relatively small area. Hollingsworth and Coughlin took up the contract to raise this building, and by November 1865 had raised the building and the surrounding sidewalk 27.5 inches without any damage afflicted to the building. Although many buildings were raised, other cheaper steps were often taken. For many older wooden buildings, instead of raising them to the new street grade, many owners preferred to sit them on rollers and then move them to either the outskirts of the city or to the suburbs by way of City Street. This became such a common occurrence that it was considered nothing but common traffic. Businesses in these buildings remained open even as they were actively moving, requiring shoppers to climb into a moving front door. Some building owners, instead of raising their buildings or moving them, simply made their second floor into their first floor and converted their original first floor into a basement. Then, in 1871, disaster struck. The Great Chicago Fire destroyed nearly 3 square miles of the city and left over 100,000 people homeless. The fire, destroying much of the city, completely undid much of the raising done only a few years before. Although the fire was a huge setback and led to a huge feeling of hopelessness, even before the last building was finished burning, an immediate sense of the need to rebuild swept over the city. As Joseph Miller, an editor of the Chicago Tribune, said, "Cheer up. In the midst of a calamity without parallel in the world's history, looking upon the ashes of 30 years' accumulations, the people of this once beautiful city have resolved that Chicago shall rise again. Using the surviving foundations built under the lifted buildings and the new space, Chicago was able to begin construction on many new buildings that were not only larger, but also followed stricter building codes and thus were more safe."
Cincinnati sits on the banks of the Ohio River, and reminders of its tumultuous past are visible from both above ground, wow, and below.
You guys are going to follow me now to my absolute favorite building.
Our tour started in the Over-the-Rhine neighborhood.
This building is called Vielitz. It used to be the heart of the entertainment district.
Part of its resurgence is looking back at its past.
All right.
Brewing is a big part of Cincinnati's history, with much of it buried underground in a series of tunnels.
This is going to be a big adventure, but I don't know if it's going to be lovely. Here we go.
So they had access to clean, cold, fresh water, while the rest of the community is drinking disgusting canal water. And of course, they used it for the noble purpose of making beer. And then let's go to Taft's Ale House, and we'll sample some beers if you guys want food.
Oh, I really love Miranda. The tour actually finishes at one of the city's many breweries. While we were underground, we learned that there are still many, many tunnels that have yet to be opened up. So this tunnel experience, which lasts about an hour and a half to 2 hours, is going to do nothing more but expand, because these are all underneath the city of Cincinnati.
As you walk the streets of historic downtown Pendleton, you may not realize the secret world just beneath your feet. It all started back in the 1870s, when Chinese laborers began constructing tunnels to conduct business and take refuge from discrimination. Today, several of the tunnels have been restored and some of the town history recreated to form Pendleton Underground Tours. Executive Director of the tour, Pam Sevier, has been with the nonprofit group for 17 years now.
Well, Pendleton Underground Tours is a tour of Pendleton's downtown. It takes you through the old red light district. The tour, as you go through, the time period starts from the beginning in 1860 with the first settler. We tell you how Pendleton got its name and why is there Pendleton. And then each room that you visit underground has its own time period and its own unique history.
The tunnels were home to businesses such as Chinese laundries and butcher shops, as well as providing a haven for plenty of illegal activities. Remnants of card rooms, bordellos, and saloons provide a glimpse into the wild past of this hidden city. At one point, there were 18 bordellos operating in a town of just around 3,000. Back in 1991, Pam opened the Working Girls Hotel, just 4 doors down from the tour office. Today, the hotel is owned by Pendleton Tours and offers a fun look at the Wild West. Now, since some of the tour is geared towards adult guests, arrangements can be made to alter the route a bit. But children 6 years of age and up are encouraged to take the tour and learn more of the unique roles of the Chinese on our history in the West.
It's more of an adult tour, but all the schools in the area come through, but they don't go in the brothel. They just take the first half. And you can, as a family, choose to take just the first half, but it does cost the same.
Since its opening back in 1989, the Pendleton Underground Tour has become the #1 tourist attraction in Eastern Oregon. And people of all ages and from all corners of the globe have taken the tour. With the growing popularity of the tour, reservations are highly recommended and group packages are available. Just make sure to call ahead for seasonal hours and openings because space is limited and the tour fills up quickly.
I just think that Pendleton Underground Tours fills a void in history. We talk about subject matter that they don't learn in school. We talk about what was going on downtown, you know, in the early days. What they say, it's the funnest history lesson you'll ever take.
So, if you're looking for a new take on the Old West, bring the family and make your next journey to Pendleton, Oregon, and take the Underground Tour, because this is one hidden treasure that won't be kept a secret for long.
So the bartender picks up the gold poke once again and then just measures out the right amount. Whatever. Which might give you an idea then as to why it was the bartenders in the old Western movies are always cleaning on their bar.
The Underground Seattle Tour is a humorous stroll through intriguing subterranean storefronts and sidewalks, entombed when the city rebuilt on top of itself after the Great Fire of 1889. The 90-minute walking tour begins above ground in Doc Maynard's public house, a restored 1890s saloon.
All right, well, good afternoon and welcome to Bill Speidel's Underground Tour. It is a history tour. I thought before we leap into history, I'd just give you a little background on Bill Speidel. The tour began in 1965, about 42 years ago, and the neighborhood, Pioneer Square, was very run down. It had broken windows, broken skylights, boarded shut, and parents told their kids, don't go down to Skid Row. So the city said, well, let's just tear down those old buildings, we'll put up some nice new parking lots, and a grassroots preservation movement got started. So that's how this tour got started. And Bill wrote his own book to go with the tour. It's called Sons of the Prophets. Prophets is spelled P-R-O-F-I-T-S, because Bill said the pioneers were here for just one reason, and that was to make money.
After a short 20-minute introduction inside Doc Maynard's, the tour spills into historic Pioneer Square before plunging into the underground for a time capsule view of the buried city itself.
Madam Lou Graham, Seattle's economic founding mother and favorite seamstress, died in 1904 of an occupational hazard. At the time, she had $250,000 in her estate, and all of that money went directly to what is today Seattle's public school system.
Okay, so what we're looking at here is part of the underground in Pioneer Square. Remember, they had that big fire that was 1889, and they were a little too low, so they had this flooding problem, drainage, sewage problem. What they want to do is elevate the streets. They did that here on this street, a little over 12 feet. The street is on one side. The buildings on the other were underneath the sidewalks. This is where the sidewalks used to be.
The hidden underground of Old Seattle continues all the way around the block and encompasses 30 blocks of the city that were never filled in.
The day the city of Seattle burned, we had quite a few things working to our disadvantage. First of all, we had a water system that was rather poor. It failed us. We were having a very low tide when the fire started. It was a warm, dry day in the city, and the fire chief, he was out of town at a firemen's convention.
It was a glue fire in a carpenter shop. Upstairs was a paint store. Around the corner they had hardware stores with tons of ammunition. They had bullets, they had dynamite, explosions. A miracle, no one died. People were running around trying to save merchandise. Some people were running around trying to save other people's merchandise without telling them about it. And then the population doubled, so it actually worked out pretty well. They had a chance to reinvent themselves, and Seattle kind of rose like a phoenix from the ashes.
Let's go on in.
Follow Miss Odessa down behind the red doors to a time when old Sacramento was bustling with brothels, fueled by the gold rush.
You're going to
be up there for months and months and months. And you're going to get very sad. You're going to get very, very lonely. All right? So these professional ladies knew that was going to happen.
There's plenty of camp, but also plenty to learn on this adult-only tour at Old Sacramento's Underground. There are all kinds of artifacts, from what the ladies of the night wore to what they dined with while on their dates.
A lot of bottles were found here in Old Sacramento. It was very tedious work being a miner, so they enjoyed their free time.
And did you know the ladies of ill repute were called soiled doves? You'll also learn about their work schedule. And there are other delicate topics like
feminine hygiene, all right?
Put it this way, seltzer water has many uses. All of this from a culture that sprung up almost overnight, more than 160 years ago.
Definitely shows the different types of people that were here. It was the most multicultural event that has happened in California, the Gold Rush.
Shelby Davis had no idea all this was going on right under her nose.
I lived here since '99 and I had no idea that this was even here. It's actually pretty rad to know that this is downtown.
Come on, gather around.
I'm always walking over that. Yeah. Looking down, wondering what's underneath.
Now ladies, look at this up here. I told a lot of people. That's how we used to get out of the ferry street. There were stairs going up there and out there.
Okay, I'm kind of turned around. Where are we right now?
That's the street right up there.
Which street is that? Liberty Street.
Liberty.
That's Liberty.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is Ferry? This is a great building. This is great. Isn't it awesome? I love this. I can watch people walking up there. I walk over that every day to get to the parking garage. Isn't it crazy?
Underground Chattanooga is like a phoenix that rises up every now and then.
So I was introduced to Underground Chattanooga when I first moved here by being out with friends at night, and then you'd pass by some grate or a hole in the ground and people would say, that's Underground Chattanooga under there. There's a whole underground city, you know, just like underground Atlanta. There's all these old storefronts and buildings, and it's very mythical sounding maze of tunnels and old structures. So that was my first impression of Underground Chattanooga. Since then, obviously, my understanding of what Underground Chattanooga is has changed drastically. But I think a lot of people in Chattanooga have that same kind of experience. They start to hear about little snatches of this place, this forgotten, entombed city underneath the sidewalks where we walk every day.
Chattanooga was a huge flooding problem. I think you know that, and we had periodic floods probably every decade. We would have a major flood, and this obviously became a problem for an area like ours because this would leave mud and residue in businesses and homes downtown. And
you would have the river coming 20 to 60 feet beyond its normal levels and just devastating downtown. And so you see, after the 1867 flood, you see after the 1875 flood, you see some newspaper articles where the editors, reporters are calling for something to be done.
And so somewhere around the 1880s, and the documentation on this is very lacking, as I'm sure you found out, the decision was made, and as the story goes, it was first very ad hoc. That people would, build up a little bit of their business, and then that grew over time to become more of a municipal project to build up some areas. And it created this sort of underground Chattanooga that people talk about, where what used to be the first story of a building is now this basement sort of entombed under the city streets.
It was a gradual process, apparently, so that it's just incremental, a little bit at a time here and there kind of thing. And because it occurred over a long time, it didn't really enter the consciousness of people enough to write about it, I guess. When I say there's no documentation about this process, there's a lot of discussion in the city council notes, when they took meeting notes, about doing something about it, including levy, but also raising the grade. And so they were discussing it. It was in the air. That idea was in the air.
You know, really, to me, underground Chattanooga is very localized. I mean, when you think about it, you don't even think about all of downtown. I really think most of it was focused on a little section, sort of between focused on Market and Cherry Street, sort of between 7th and 8th in that area. That was really where underground Chattanooga was, and where you can really see the areas where it was built up.
Retaining walls is a new element that Maury nicely recognized, and what he's proposing is that
they built stone walls about 3 feet from a building and then sort of capped it, and then if you've got 2 of those on either side of the street, in the middle of the street, then they had to fill that all in. And so you could see them filling that with whatever sort of industrial, not garbage, but, you know, not only dirt and stone and rubble, but, you know, whatever else they have, and that sort of stuff would fit right in there. It's a great way to get rid of debris, use it, build it up, and then cap it off with a street. And so I think that's what they did.
So underground Chattanooga is actually a pretty limited area of the city where you can obviously see where the grades were raised. You can see some archways kind of right by the sidewalk, about ankle height or like shin height, around 7th and Cherry Street. You can see where the grade was raised. And there's other little spots like that kind of throughout the city where you can see door frames, the tops of door frames that were filled in. And underneath some of those buildings, a lot of the buildings have been the first story, what was originally the first story in the 1800s, has been filled in with fill dirt. And so you actually can't even go into sort of the cave. But in the areas that you can kind of go into underneath buildings and see where those old windows, where those old doors are basically basements of old buildings, private property. There's not a bunch of tunnels connecting them. They're sort of isolated.
It's kind of hard to get to. Landowners are not enthusiastic about having people go in there and trip and fall in arborvitae. It's kind of funky. I mean, it's a lot of demolition debris, concrete, busted up concrete, reinforcement bars, and it's not very, it's not amenable to tourists, I'll put it that way. And it is amenable to lawsuits if somebody gets injured.
It's not the scale that people think about, and it you know, it really captures the imagination to think about, okay, so there's this whole underground city down under there. And that's really neat, but that's not what it is, you know. And people say all the time, probably once a week, someone says to me, "Can I get into underground Chattanooga?" And of course, you really can't unless you get permission from the owner. But it's not all that exciting. I always say to people, "Have you ever been in a basement?" That's kind of what it's like. It's like being in an unfinished basement. And so, you know, it's really neat and it's a cool story, but it's not exactly what I think people imagine it to be.
So there's 2 types of underground Chattanooga. A tunnel underneath Broad Street is not the first type. It's the second type. It was a tunnel that was constructed under Broad Street, where, you know, however deep the grade was. There's 2 ways you can get under the ground. One is to raise the ground itself, or to go into the ground that way.
Seeing very obvious doors, old windows, and it makes you really wonder what those doors were looking out on, what the view from those windows was, because now it's just dank, dingy, sort of underworld basement mess.
I've heard that people have seen tree stumps at a foot under, or not a foot, a story underground. I've never seen one, so I can't vouch for it, nor can I disclaim it. You know, it's neat. I'd love myself to see that, because it would tell you, yeah, if there is a tree trunk, a true rooted tree trunk, a story underground, well, then we've got something there. That's a great piece of evidence. I haven't seen it, and I don't even know where that was supposed to have been.
3rd Street is hollow underneath. I've actually seen that, and it's about this tall. It's concrete pillars with iron reinforcement, and that iron's rusting. So eventually, I think there's going to be a problem there. I don't know how long that concrete will last.
I also think from a very practical standpoint that it's important for our city to know where these pockets are and what the status of that infrastructure is, because we don't know how sound it is, and there's could be some questions to as to whether it's gonna hold up forever. I mean, it's been about 100 years, so it's held up pretty good so far, but that foundry sand and some of the materials that were used to fill in are not the most stable. At least that's what some of the utility workers that we talked to have found. Some of the city planners, city workers have some concerns about that.
And it's freaky to think when you're going over 3rd Street, you know, to get on the highway or something, that there's this much room between you and the actual ground. We saw these cabinets for holding drawers with parts, and they even had labels still on them for the parts for the trolleys that they were maintaining. And just to see the scale of it, because there's nothing on the surface. You have no, concept of how much space there is below you when you walk there. So the first time I saw that complex, that maintenance complex, it like blew me away.
I became skeptical at one point where we went into a lot of places and it was pretty clear that all the places we were going into were more modern. And they were really just basements. But you do go into some of these and you see, a bricked up window. And I agree with you. They can't all be coal chutes.
That was the fuel of choice, and they had coal chutes, and it's messy. You don't want to bring it in the lobby, so you put it in the basement.
A 3-story brick building in downtown Chattanooga does not need to have 6 coal chutes. And so, you do say, okay, some of these are probably windows. And then when you go down into a couple of the buildings and you see the retaining walls that were built, and you can see them in a couple, you do say, okay, well now this makes sense that this. So there is some evidence that points to, yeah, this is not just a legend.
I'm kind of nervous about 3rd Street. I generally try to avoid it. I may be overreacting. I suspect that the city does some kind of inspection because it's public property. The upper part is public property. That's an interesting question as to who owns what's under 3rd Street. That's the only thing that makes me nervous about underground Chattanooga. Cities start out as crossings over the river, maybe at Ross's Landing, and then get big and beefy as they evolve. And to me, underground Chattanooga is just a reminder that we started out in a form that was different than what we see today.
We drew down to the corner of 5th and Los Angeles Street, where there's a bar called the King Eddie that has its own special tie to the Prohibition era. Alright, so we're here to check out the King Eddie Saloon, established in 1933, and I hear that there's a speakeasy in the basement. Could be a rumor, we don't know. So we're going to go in and talk to Chris, the owner, and see what he can tell us about it. And there's also something downstairs that not a lot of people get to see.
Right.
And what is that we're going to see?
So this bar is one of the oldest bars in Los Angeles. They've had a liquor license since 1933, I believe.
Okay.
But before that, they had a speakeasy in the basement. So originally, where we are now was a piano shop, and they had a speakeasy down there that is rumored to have had tunnel access to under City Hall, and all the bigwigs and cops could go straight from City Hall to their King Eddie speakeasy. And
so we're standing on a piece of history right now. Yeah. So can we check it out?
Let's go.
Wow. What are these paintings over here?
So these are all the original murals from the speakeasy. This middle area was where they serviced all the customers and everything. So you can see also some of these sort of crazy fantasy paintings they had.
So you own essentially a little museum.
Yeah,
from the 1920s.
and we get a lot of interest from mural enthusiasts at least once a day, usually more than once a day, whether they are curious about the speakeasy or more often it's the tunnels, because everyone wants to explore the tunnels. So, but this is all original. Yeah.
Now I see more of what it's like over there. It's a little bit faded, but here I can see.
Yeah, we got a keg with a draft beer being poured. It's all a little bit cartoony, but kind of cool and retro. And now You got your light, so let's go back to this creepy.
Well, there is something behind here.
I'll follow you in there.
Yeah.
On this side, we have some more of the old funky murals.
Okay.
And now we're underneath the sidewalk.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're right here off of 5th. This is 5th Street here, and Los Angeles is behind us.
So the building really ends right here at the doorway.
Right.
And this is under the
Yeah,
street.
this is the main load-bearing wall here. You can see there's been a lot of tarring to prevent leaks.
Yeah.
So more murals as we go around. That always clues you in that we're still in speakeasy zone.
So is this under...
So this is Los Angeles Street,
okay.
right.
So tell me, what was this area used for?
So this was a lift that would go up through the sidewalk. You've seen those metal, doors on sidewalks that in the old days used to open up and you'd freight whatever you had to freight down to the basement.
Yeah, there's some old
so there's lots
gears.
of gears and pulley wheels.
That's so cool. Virtually untouched since the 20s era.
Yeah, in case we need to rebuild it.
Yeah.
All the materials are there.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for the tour.
My pleasure.
It's been very interesting.
Yeah, good to have you guys.
I appreciate it.
One of the key features of what's unseen about Missoula's downtown past is the idea that there were so many thriving businesses underground, so underneath the buildings that we now visit all the time, that no longer operate in that way. This was one of those very spaces. So you can see in the image of both the building, this is the Hammond building, so the corner across from the Florence, right, the corner front and Higgins, before it burned down, there are a few railings right here, staircases and railings just here on the sides. Both of those images suggest to you that's where people access these underground shops from. And so you're standing right now exactly where the shops would have been underneath the original Hammond building. Right here, there would have been staircases, and this is the entryway, right? So here I would enter through a door into those shops right there. You can also see the remnants of that, kind of where the rubbles piled up, in this photo of the burned, I think still burning Hammond building from 1934. So come on inside here and get a sense of what that looks like. This is not a dimly lit part. Anything caving in and businesses. At one point, 100 years ago, 115 years ago, those were all over the city. Most buildings had them, and now what Unseen Missoula, the tour, is trying to do is talk with local business owners about gaining access to not just the spaces, but the stories that we haven't yet uncovered. Because there are plenty of places that are using these buildings as storage, rightfully, but there are stories underneath them we know, and we're eager to hear more about them. Oh, really? Coffee house where you're just not here.
Now we are slowly making our way down to the original grade. Now, I did not mention a fire, but I'll mention it right now. In 1852, we had a terrible fire. This fire did start out in a bakery. Now, typically a bakery fire is not that intense. You can throw some flour on it, and hopefully that will diffuse the fire. Well, unfortunately, can anyone guess where was right next door to that fire? I mean, that bakery shop. Yes, that is a close-up gun in a while. TNT demolition shop. So they can blow those mines open, or also for the railroad tracks as well for Sierra. So when y'all come down here, so when that spark did go across, hit the bakery, hit the TNT shop, that's why we have none of our original 1950 beyond houses. So that's what we decided to build with brick. That's also when we said cast iron shutters. The cast iron shutters are developed, so you close them to withstand the heat, and hopefully your brick can withstand the heat as well. And you can contain the fire so it doesn't jump from house to house. But my only question is, how come all our fire escapes are still made out of wood? We'll slowly get smarter. But before they lived in this building, this would have been the first floor area. You would have entered through that doorway right there. This is where Pony Express was stationed from 1860 to 1861. Wells Fargo went by around the corner, and they started like roughly 1858 towards the later half of the gold rush. So what y'all are standing on, you guys are standing on the original sidewalk of the 1850s. This is would have been the sidewalk they would have used to go back and forth to go and do the chores in these buildings along Old Town Sacramento. Gas lanterns on the sidewalk. And then it just got dark, the sun just went away. And out of nowhere, we had a warm flashlight. But because And his first floor and second floor remain untouched by water. Very nice. But unfortunately, like I said, with any floods, college period is followed shortly after. But like I said, all my kids survived. What you're staring at right here, these are the original bricks from when they bricked up for the road. And when we turn this corner right over here, I'll explain everything to y'all. Now, I don't know if I've mentioned, but if you do hear any footsteps above you or any noise, it's just people walking above you on the new sidewalk. I'm trying not to scare y'all. Ghosts only come out at night, remember that. But just to give you a comparison to where we're at, the road that we just crossed would have been right over there. This is the sidewalk, the new sidewalk that we crossed to get to where we are. Yeah. And again, watch out, please. Sneaky little steps up here. So this is the building that we are underneath. This particular building had 162 of those jacks. Yeah. So a little bit more than just one. So remember, the building's up here. You dig underneath, up here. Then they would add support beams, I promise a little thicker than this one right here, and crisscross patterns, all underneath. And so why you see this right here. And this is before the brick is. So at this point, it would be just wood sticking out. Then every few feet, they would place a jack underneath the building right here. Now for every jack, would have been 2 people to help turn it. They would have turned in a count of 5 seconds. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just to make sure everyone knows how to turn in unison and not going like this. That would be no fun if you're in a building with that kind of angle. We figured out how no one died because of the heat process. So if something fell on you and it looked like you were about to die, they would shuffle you home as fast as possible. You die in your home, you use the Jackson Privet on another house, and then fill up the sidewalk. That's all the privet right there on the side of this house. They wouldn't put a foundation, they just put a floor and fill up. That's how they're able to live. So again, towards the later half, they started becoming more over. And that's what we got one of the big foundations around some of the buildings in San Francisco that are still standing from 1900s. Now everybody can. And the Reed brothers are one of them. They are originally from actually Illinois. East Coast, but that did not stop them from coming out west. Open up a medical practice.
I'm on Vine Street and over the Rhine. This area was once known as the Paris of the United States, and for a good cause, you can tour one of the largest historic districts in America.
In the mid to late 1800s, Over the Rhine became the most densely populated neighborhood in America, which led to the nickname Paris of the West. Vine Street alone was home to more than 130 saloons, breweries, beer gardens, and theaters, making Over the Rhine the epicenter for Cincinnati social life. The Queen City Underground Historic Walking Tour takes you inside for a peek into the past.
People are going to get a chance to see parts of Cincinnati that they didn't know were there, and they're going to hear history that they're probably not real familiar with, and it'll tell people how important the Over the Rhine area is.
The tour continues down Vine Street and stops at the former Kaufman Brewery. Once inside the pre-Civil War building, you will descend below the city streets and into the deep, dark tunnels.
Currently, we're standing in the tunnels, and the logger tunnels that are underneath this building were used for the production of the lager beer.
Cincinnati has a rich brewing history. In the late 1800s, Cincinnati had the highest per capita consumption of beer in America, almost all supplied by local breweries.
In this area, they drank 2.5 times the amount of beer that the national average was. It was roughly 40 gallons a year of beer per man, woman, and child that was being consumed in Over the Rhine at the time.
This was an area that victimized sailors, loggers, cowboys, sheep herders, were brought underground, locked up in holding cells, kept there till the sea captain was ready to leave with the ship. Then they haul them through the underground to the ship and collect $50 per man blood money. The saloons were the crossroads. That's where everybody seemed to end up. And when people got drunk, that was easy to victimize them. If they weren't drunk enough, they could slip something into their drinks. And when they were very shaky on their feet, they'd walk to a certain area in the saloon, or led over to that place. Bartender would pull a lever, person would fall through the floor right through a trapdoor into the underground. They took their victim's shoes. So if they escaped, they couldn't run too fast or too far because they broke glass and spread it throughout the underground. And if somebody was able to get away, they could always find them because that'd be the person limping going down the street. And of course, they could always follow the blood that they leave behind.
It seems like a lot of these tunnels have been sort of destroyed. I mean, the connections between these various basements. Do you know what the cause of that was?
The underground, from the very beginning, was always changing. Anytime there was a new construction, that impacted it. When they work on the streets and the sidewalks, that really impacted it. 1925, when they put the seawall in, that really impacted it. In fact, the building owners along the old Front Avenue, which is now NATO Parkway, they claimed the city filled so much that the second story of their building became their new ground floor entrance. That's how much it's been filled. Mid-1970s, when they put in the transit mall, that impacted the underground. Mid-1980s, when they put in light rail, that impacted the underground. And the latest form of impact is earthquake proofing. Earthquake proofing, they cover up the beautiful brick and stone with steel and concrete, and it vanishes. Another major impact was in the late 1950s when Portland undertook its first urban renewal project called the South Auditorium Renewal. That destroyed a lot of it. What is left, we can only cherish because it survived progress. And the underground was kind of a unique concept. It was buildings that interconnected the other buildings through archways, so you could go from basement to basement. Tunnels went under the streets, linking block to block or between buildings. They also took sections of the underground, they walled it off with slabwood. Now slabwood was the first cut off of log in the middle. It's the round part. People with money used it for firewood. The people without money actually built with it. There are houses standing to this very day made of what they considered at that time to be trash wood. And every single section of the underground had slabwood in it.
This deadfall system was used in Portland first. Then later on in the Barbary Coast in San Francisco, Astoria, Oregon, Aberdeen, Washington, Port Angeles, and even Port Townsend, who's very famous today for its Victorian houses. But when you fell to the floor at Port Townsend, there was a boat waiting for you because you were in the water.
Looking at the original level of Sacramento, probably was raised in the 1860s. Right now, they have turned the underground area into a tasting room for wines.
In a rare overview photo of Fresno's Chinatown, one can see how overcrowded it was. Permitted to live in a very limited space with summer heat, it made perfect sense for the Chinese to create an underground world.
But so some of you know what this is?
Yes.
What is it?
It used to bring things up from the ground, forget what you call it, conveyor, elevator, yeah.
Yeah, kind of, sort of, but not quite as fancy. Very few of these you'll find, but you'll find most of them around Chinatown. They actually open up, and it's a straight shot to the basement that we're going to go into. And most of them, they were hooked up to like a wooden chute, and that's one of the things that you're going to see. So people would have items picked up here, open it up, and send the stuff down. And that was one of the reasons why we do have connective tunnels, because what you'll see in Chinatown is what you see above ground is below. We have the same size basements that go from one end of the block to the other. And the tunnels, when people talk about them, when I talk about, are connectors. You could take things across the street or down the alleys, which made perfect sense, and we'll talk about that as we go. Okay, now when you were coming down the stairs, did you notice something? Now, would you want to carry heavy things up that stair? No. But if you look, those are archways, and those are built into the walls, and those went across the way. The metal lifts that you saw, or the top, go there, and if you look up in there, you could actually see the sunlight. But that's one of the chutes that come down. It's still there. It had been replaced, years ago. But if you take a look, if you go straight in there, you'll see that you could see sunlight. And the question for a lot of people is why they would be so close together. unless there are burial walls separating different places. So, because that did make a lot of sense, and we'll see when we look at the doors that we found, or that are here, why they would be so close together, and that was because some of this was divided. Right now we're in the third business from upstairs. And when we go through the next side, we'll be going like about 4 businesses and 4 or 5 businesses. And then if you look, there's a lot of piping and wiring and the work. So it's not that people don't know things exist, it's just that people don't like to talk about it. But look down on the ground a minute. What do you see? Concrete. Kind of bizarre that you have old basements and almost every single basement that I've been in is concreted. The same if you go down our alleys. Take a look, they're concreted. So what we believe happens, and we've talked to a couple other people, is that this was deeper when the concrete was down. Because if you look, this is, excuse me, I'm gonna flip this back up again. This is awfully close to people's heads. So we do believe that there's another sub area. We haven't been able to get down there, but we do have a hole that's over on this side. Watch your head here. That's a real sharp little corner, by the way, I've hit that. And there's a plank of wood. So be careful, up and down, remember, up and down. And we've had people, we're never quite sure where some of these stairways go to, because a lot of them are blocked. But this is one that we actually had put a cover on, and it goes down about 2 feet, but it's to a dirt flooring. So we know that there's dirt down here. And then if you look, because if you look at the edge where the walls are, if you look down, and what you see, yeah, watch, this one is very low and has nasty little corners, okay, is that the bricks on the flooring, on the base of it, which is interesting the way that they've stacked it up to hold up the walls, is very old. But those bricks were set up so that it helps brace up the walls, okay? Okay, this is one of the doors that we found, and when you have a chance to look at it, it is a handmade door. It was fit into this archway. These are handmade bolts that held the door together, and when I first saw it, there were little scratch marks. But this was a peephole going into the next basement or building or whatever is going on. So you could peek, and what you'll see is the next basement. But if you could tell when you look at this, it has to open inward. There's no way for it to open outward. It was closed. And then if you look behind you, let me scoot this, is another archway that has been bricked in. Most of that bricking is only 1 brick thick. Okay? All right, now let me switch with you guys. This is our second door that we found. And as you can see that it opens outward, but it's a handmade door. You could tell that it was, as opposed to the other door, had to be fitted into that section. But it's all handmade. Those are handmade bolts and hinges for it. And so that's, and they were pretty narrow people because I'd have to go in sideways. But when you think about it and you ask yourself, why would there be 2 very solid doors within 10 feet of each other going into different things? So what we know about this is that the basements were divided up between different businesses and different activities going on. But this is one door that opens outward, the other door opens inward. But this is one, if you take a look at it, those are all handmade hinges. So it is quite old.
What kind of activity?
Well, as soon as you look at that, we'll go in the next little room and I'll talk about it, okay? There is a map called the Sanborn maps, and they were with the fire department. The city of Fresno has it, that the fire department actually have of the Chinatown area above and below. And so that's so that they could go through and double check to see how things, and we'll take a look at one door that's actually a fire door. But this is one of the rooms that appears on the map. It is much deeper than it, because you can see, again, it's all concrete. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do, and this goes to the question of what kind of activities went on down here. One, it was used for storage because it made sense where if you didn't have the room upstairs. The tunnels made sense to transport things back and forth. It was sometimes used for rooms, of which I know I saw bedding and a table when the city of Fresno cracked open a top of a tunnel when they were putting the storm drain through for the stadium on China Alley between E and F, of which 24 hours later they promptly filled with slurry, put a metal slab down, and then continued with a storm drain to the stadium. We have another story. That's why we're not real confident that if they cut into another one, city/high-speed rail, that they're going to do any kind of archaeological investigation. The other one is a story that we have from the guy that was doing one of the construction folks for the stadium. He couldn't figure out why the water was going down in the stadium in one section. He had the crew dig, they dug, and they went down pretty far down, and they found a cavern. They found a late model, a very old kind of truck on a road facing Chinatown. So he rappelled down, looked around, was ordered by the city manager, the guy who was in charge of the stadium, to get out. 24 hours later, without any kind of research, was filled in with concrete and slurry in his right field of the stadium. So that tells you how far within the city commitment to documentation of Chinatown. People are collecting bricks, and our walls are going to fall shortly. Yeah. We had one wall in Chinatown that was officially knocked down by the city. That was one of the oldest walls in the area, but a guy drove his car through it to take bricks for his yard. So, but this is another chute, and if you look up, that's another one that goes, but that's an older one, and it's actually been cleaned. I don't know, whoop, okay. Well, I'm not sure where the stuff went, because we don't own this stuff. We only could take a guess. But if you look up at that one, you could see really what those the metal shaft looks like from the under area. But that was a straight, kind of real straight shot down. But if you look up, you could see the bottom of the metal. That one was what you would call a swift kind of chute.
I don't like to walk on those things because I never express how old they are.
Oh, no problem, no problem.
No. I mean, in New York City, like even when I was going to, I never liked walking on them as a kid. My dad used to go, just walk on them. I'd be like, no, I don't want to.
Well, you can see if you're walking on them, unless it's welded shut, you had a better idea not to walk on them. Okay, we have more archways, more that have been filled in. And then, actually I have to tell you, this is the door that the Fresno Fire Department, I have to search them every time we do a tour for the Fresno Fire Department because they want this door. As I said, it's an example of an old style fire door. And this is actually a handmade weight that would actually send the door across when there was a fire. So the fire department wants it as an example in their museum. So far I have to frisk them each time they're down here. Actually, I just want to frisk them if they couldn't carry the door. But so as you can see, the way that it was set up and how old it is, why they would want it. Because if you look at it, it's a handmade door, fire door, and that would slide across. So, and we were looking at that one chute. If some of you had a chance to look, you could actually see the bottom of the metal grating that goes on the sidewalk upstairs. So, what we know from possibly, this room was again used for storage. There were some of the places used for gaming. Some of you know what that is, or can you tell me what you think it is?
It's probably like a stove hood.
It's a stove hood. Don't you think that they would be little tiny, tiny people if you had a stove there and that was a hood? So you know that the floor was much lower. Okay, because if that's where the stove hood was, where was the stove? And if you had to stand in front of it, you'd have to be munchkins to be able to use it. So you know that this entire flooring was much lower.
Cindy Iverson loves to track down and share Oregon history, especially Pendleton, Oregon's history that's been locked away for decades.
Hey, we'll get everybody to move this way, please.
It's a walking tour called Pendleton Underground and takes you back to a time when Eastern Oregon was booming and small towns hid their secrets.
This is basically the way it was. We try to keep everything as intact as possible.
The tour shows off the darker side of Pendleton. For example, in the Shamrock card room, Iverson says the bartender cheated customers out of gold dust by simply spilling a little each time.
If they weren't serving drinks, they were cleaning the bar. Now, they didn't do that to be neat and tidy necessarily. Usually what they were doing was sweeping up all the excess gold dust that didn't quite make it to the scale. When no one was looking, the gold dust might find its way onto the floor. So this next area that we're going to go into is typical Chinese living space. It's all dirt flooring. I want you to watch your footing.
The tunnels were built by hundreds of Chinese workers who were discriminated against by the town's white population. So much so, the workers were not allowed on the streets during daylight hours.
They were teased, taunted, shot, killed. We have one news account of a Chinese worker who was shot and killed in Echo. The cowboy that did the shooting and the killing was fined $5. That was not for the killing, it was for discharging his firearm in the city limits. So that's how bad it was.
The unique tour shows off turn-of-the-century opium dens, laundries, butcher shops, and bootleg whiskey bars.
Pendleton had quite a vast tunnel system under their city. The whole downtown core was a maze of tunnels. So if you knew how to get down here, you knew where all the stairways were, you knew where all the exits and the entrances, you could go almost anywhere underground.
It's this great legend that there are all these buildings that if you go into their basements, you see windows looking out into nothing, and you see all the great, architecture of a 19th century first floor that's down there. You can't look into the history of Chattanooga downtown without at some point stumbling across this underground idea.
When I started doing talk radio, it came up as a topic a couple of times. People would call and say, what have you ever heard? What's the truth? Do you know anything about it? So got intrigued, and Rob Gentry, who was the brewmaster at the time at Big River, gave me the invite. And we went down. Cell phones were still not exactly, not everybody had them. Somebody had one, and I said, you want me to call in? Jay Scott, the jammer, was on the air, and I said, this is cool. I'm gonna call him, see if we get a signal. And he said, yeah, let's do it, let's go on the air. And I just described what I saw. And after that, it just kind of blew up. I mean, people wanted to take tours.
Underground Chattanooga is a proposal to explain the structure of the city. And the proposal that I'm familiar with is that because of flooding, the grade of the entire city was raised in a critical area that was prone to flooding.
So we had significant floods. The worst was 1867, right after the Civil War. But we had about every decade, 1870s, 1880s, there were a couple, 1890s, there was one, and the other really big one, 1917, there was a big flood downtown.
First floors of buildings all the way to the Reed House were submerged. So it put a damper on the attempts to develop Chattanooga. The alternative ideas was to put a levee around Ross's Landing and prevent the water from coming in that way. And that would have cut off the river. I mean, it would have been technically and practically, I mean, in terms of economy, that was a non-starter.
By the 1880s, the citizens were so frustrated with the frequent flooding that they decided to build up the city streets. I don't know exactly when this happened because there are, to my knowledge, no firm records that would objectively show, hey, here's what we did and when we did it. But most people have said this was done sometime in the late 1880s.
What you're talking about is repurposing what's already there. The basement used to be first floor. So first floor is now the second floor, and the basement is what used to be the first floor.
I think the biggest area where underground Chattanooga is really in the vicinity of 7th, between 6th and 8th Street and Cherry Street to Market Street. Is that little 4 or 5 block area where you really saw buildup.
The problem with the whole underground Chattanooga is it's piecemeal. It's not continuous. It's not like underground Atlanta. So it's bits and pieces. So it's real hard to get a handle on it.
As I'll tell people, there are a lot of things in Chattanooga that are underground, and they're in Chattanooga, but they're not underground Chattanooga. I do not believe that the sports barn and the car barns that lead over towards Big River's basement are 1880s, 1890s era underground Chattanooga. The car barns were built around 1906. The Volunteer Building is another good example where people will tout that basement, but the timing doesn't work out. The Reed House is another good example. When you look at images of the former Reed House, the prior building, There's never a point where it changed, where the level of the building went from, say, a 4-story to a 3-story building. It was always the same as it was. So those are some common areas that I think, just based on what we've seen, probably are not underground Chattanooga as we think of it. You know, they're underground and they're in Chattanooga. And they're neat spaces with great history to each of them, but they're not that building up of streets to prevent flooding that we think about as underground Chattanooga. Right now we're standing at the corner of 7th and Cherry Streets, and really when you start talking about underground Chattanooga, this is really, to me, ground zero for where we believe most of the significant street buildup occurred. We theorize that a lot of the fill just came from about a block and a half up here from around the courthouse, was brought down here, filled in this street, and then it's why we have a little more of a gradual hill here than maybe they had decades ago. And the real evidence that you see here are the tops, and you'll see about 4 or 5 of them here, the tops of these window arches. You wouldn't build this in the street as a decorative feature. This is something where, you know, and you can see it if you get down into the basement, which is hard to do these days, but you can see the other side of it. This building has been so many things since the 1880s that, you know, you wonder to yourself, you know, how many changes it's undergone. One does not put windows typically in a basement. There could be a question as to whether this could have been, you know, an interior window or something, but I think with what we're seeing here with some of the more decorative brickwork and the fact that this is matched by another window on the other side and there's a door in the middle, just tells you, combined with all this other stuff, that this most likely was an entryway to a business. And then over here, 4 feet away, we see, you know, this immense, monstrous stone wall. And this gives you an idea of what they did then, you know, where you've got this building sitting here, you want to protect it from floods, so they built a stone wall, a retaining wall. Fill is on the other side of it. Presumably there's another retaining wall on the other side of the street, and it's all filled in. And then the sidewalk is right up here above us. These are not they're not National Historic Sites. They're not National Park Service sites. They're the basements of someone's building. A private business owns this building, and it's just their basement. And because they're privately owned, their future becomes privately determined to a degree.
There's liability problems if somebody goes in there to experience underground Chattanooga.
What would be great if it could be done would to be a large-scale scientific survey of these sites.
Photograph it, map it, get it in a document so we know where it is.
It's hard to say we're going to preserve it. We can't tell a private business owner what to do with their basement.
Some sections are preserved because nothing's being done with it. You know, there's no impacts going on. On the other hand, every time there's an upgrade of a building, something's restored, part of it disappears.
There's a lot of space that has history. Somebody can come up with enough history that can be agreed upon to put on a couple of plaques. This is a hell of a story. That's a good story to tell. What other city has that story? And to have them just sit there and continue to collect the dust and the silt seems silly.
One great idea that we've thought of is a historic sign for just showing, hey, what is underground Chattanooga? You hear about it, say, it's under here, and here's what it looks like, and here's what it was. Everybody's heard about it, everybody's curious about it, but most people don't know really anything about it except for this sort of legendary idea of an underground city.
It's so fascinating to people, and to me it illustrates what cities do. I mean, cities grow, they evolve, they change, and in this case, it started low and raised up higher as an adaptation to Mother Nature. That's an indication of the massive amounts of energy that are harnessed in urban situations. And I think Chattanooga had its own version of a 3-masted ship found 30 feet below the ground in New York Harbor. In Chattanooga, it's underground Chattanooga.
All of the examples in this video are provided as evidence as to why you might live in a mudflood city if your location has things like pavement, prism, vault, floor, and sidewalk lights, coal hole covers, and ventilation hitching posts.